Reading from the Fyodor Dostoevsky's White Knight. Let's begin. My God, a whole minute of bliss, is that really so little for the whole of man's life? It's a translated version, translated by Ronald Meyer, and the White Knights begin a sentimental love story from the memoirs of a dreamer. It begins with a quote from Ivan Turgenev. Or was his destiny from the start to be just one moment near your heart? The first night. It was wonderful night, the kind of night, dear reader, which is only possible when you are young. The sky was so starry, it was a bright sky that looking at it, you could not help but ask yourself, is it really possible for a bad-tempered and capricious people to live under such a sky? This is also a young person's question, dear reader, a very young person's question, but may the Lord ask it of your heart more often. Speaking of capricious thing, capricious and sundry bad-tempered gentlemen, I could not help but recall my own commendable conduct throughout the whole day. From early morning, an astonishing melancholy has started to torment me. It suddenly seemed that I, so alone, was being abandoned by everyone, that everyone was deserting me. Well, of course, anyone is entitled to ask, who is everyone? Because I have been living in Petersburg 8 years now, and I have hardly been able to make a single acquaintance. But what do I need acquaintances for? I'm acquainted with all of Petersburg as it is. That's why it seemed to me that everyone was abandoning me when all of Petersburg suddenly up and left for the Deccan. I was terrified of being left alone, and for 3 whole days I wandered about the city in a state of deep melancholy, not understanding in the least that it was happening to me, no matter whether I went to Nevsky Prospect or the park or wandered along the embankment. There wasn't a single person of those whom I've been accustomed to meet for a year now, in the same place at a certain time. Of course, they don't know me, but I know them. I know them intimately. I have practically learned their faces by heart, and I admire them when they are cheerful, and I'm crestfallen when they grow sad. I'm almost struck up a friendship with a certain little old man whom I met every blessed day at a certain hour on the Fonteca Tanka. His face is so dignified and thoughtful. He is always whispering under his breath and gesticulating with his left hand, while in his right hand he holds a long gnarled walking stick with a golden knob. He has even noticed me and shows a cordial concern for me. Should it happen that I am not at the same place on the Fonteca at a certain hour, I am positive that he would be crestfallen. That's why we sometimes almost greet each other, particularly when we are both in a good mood. The other day, when we had no seen each other for 2 whole days and met on the third day, we almost reached for our hats. But thank goodness we came to our senses in time, lowered our hands, and passed each other by in sympathy. I also have houses. I also have houses that are my acquaintances. As I walk, it is as if each one I came to runs out into the street in front of me, looks looks out at me with its window wide open and almost says, "Hello, how do you do?" And I thank God am well. But in May they are going to add a floor to me, or "How do you do?" And I'm having some repairs done tomorrow, or "I almost burned down and I was scared," and so forth. I have favorites among them. Some are intimate friends. One of them intends to be treated by an architect this summer. I will make it a point to drop by every day so that God forbid they don't kill it in the process. But I will never forget what happened to a certain very pretty light pink little house. It was such as a little sweet little stone house. It looked at me so cordially and so hauntingly at its ungainly neighbors that my heart would rejoice when I chanced to walk past. Suddenly, last week, I was walking down the street, and upon turning to look at my friend, I heard a plaintive cry. But they are going to paint me yellow. The scoundrels, the barbarians, they spot nothing, neither the columns nor the cornices. And my friend had turned as yellow as a canary. I almost had an attack of jaundice myself, and to this day I do not have the strength to see my poor disfigured friend who was painted the color of celestial empire. So now you understand, reader, how I am acquainted with all of Petersburg. I have already said that for 3 whole days I was tormented with anxiety, and until I guessed the reason for it, and on the street I was in a bad way. This one's gone, that one's gone, where's so and so got too? And I wasn't myself at home either. For 2 evenings I tried to put a finger on what it was I found wanting in my room, why I was so uncomfortable staying in there, and with bewilderment I examined my green sooty wall and the ceiling from which hung a cobweb that Matriona had been cultivating, and with such resounding success. I looked over all my furniture and examined every chair, wondering if that was a problem. Because I'm not myself, if even one chair it isn't in place as it was the day before. I looked out the window, but it was all in vain. I didn't feel any better. I I even took it into my head to summon Matrona and give her there and then fatherly reprimand for the cobweb and for her slow, slovenliness, slovenliness in general, but she merely looked at me in amazement and walked away without a word in response. So the cobweb hangs their safe sound to this day. It was only this morning that I finally guessed that the matter was, or why they are making off to their decas and leaving me behind. Forgive the trivial style, but I'm not up to the lofty turns of speech, because you see, everybody in Petersburg had either moved or is moving to their deca. Because after hiring a cab, every venerable gentleman of a solid appearance was immediately transformed before my eyes into a venerable father of a family who, after his daily official duty, sets off without luggage to the bosom of the family at the Decca, because every passer-by now has a quite special air about him, which all but says to every person he meets, "Gentlemen, I'm here in passing, but in 2 hours I'm leaving for the Decca." If a window opens, upon which slender fingers as white as sugar had just drummed, and out leans the head of a pretty girl who calls to a peddler with jugs of flour, I immediately there and then imagine that these flowers are being brought not simply as to take pleasure in the spring and flowers in a stuffy city apartment, but because everybody is moving to the Decca and they will be taking the flower with them. Moreover, I had already made such stride in my new special set of discovery that I could already unerringly identify on the basis of appearance alone where the Decca was located. The resident of Kamani and Patkarsi Islands, or the Peterhof Road, were distinguished by the studied elegance of their movements, their foppish summer suits, and handsome carriage that brought them to the city. The inhabitants of Paragolovo and further out at last glance inspired me with their prudence and respectability. The visitor to the Dostoevsky Island was distinguished by his unruffled, cheerful air. Whether I managed to run into a long procession of carters holding their reins as they lazily walked alongside their carts, uh, loaded with whole mountains of furniture of every description, table, chairs, couches, both Turkish and non-Turkish, the other household goods and chattels, on which the top of everything frequently would be sitting at the very summit of the load, the wizened cook, keeping watch over her master's good as the apple of her eye. Whether I looked at the boats heavily laden and household utensils as they glided down the Neva Fontanka to Chernaya, Chernaya River or the islands. The carts, the boats increased tenfold, a hundredfold before my very eyes. It seemed as though everything had up and left, and while caravans had moved to the Decas, it seemed that all of the Petersburg threatened to turn into a desert, and so that in the end I became ashamed, hurt, and sad. I had I had absolutely nowhere to go and no reason to go to Dereka. I was already to leave with every cart to drive off with every gentleman of venerable appearance who was hiring a cabby, but no one, absolutely no one invited me. It was as if I indeed was a stranger to them. I had been walking a lot and for a long time, and I had already completely succeeded as my own want in forgetting where I was when I suddenly found myself at the city gates. I cheered up in an instant and stepped to the other side of the barrier, walked between the sowing field and the meadows, oblivious of any fatigue, but sensing with my being that some burden was being lifted from my soul. All the passerby looked at me so cordially that we practically bowed to to one another. Everybody was so happy about something every day. Every last one was smoking a cigar, and I was happy as I had never been before. It was as if I had suddenly found myself in Italy. Nature had so strangely affected me, a semi-invalid city dweller who almost died of suffocation within the city walls. There is something inexplicably touching in our Petersburg nature when, with the advent of spring, she suddenly displays all her might, all the powers granted by her by heaven, when she bursts into leaves, dresses herself up, and decks herself out in a colorful flowers. Somehow I can't help but to be reminded of that weak and sickly girl at whom you sometimes look with pity, sometimes with a compassionate love, and sometimes you simply don't notice her. But then suddenly, for a moment, she somehow unexpectedly becomes inexplicable, wonderfully beautiful, and you, startled and intoxicated, unwittingly ask yourself, what power caused those sad, thoughtful eyes to shine with such fires? What summoned the blood to those pale and sunken cheeks? What has suffused those tender features of her face with passion? Why does that breast heave so? What was it that so suddenly summoned strength, life, and beauty to the poor girl's face, that it began to shine with such a smile, came to life with such a sparkling, effervescent laugh? You look around, you search for someone, you hazard a guess, but the moment passes, and perhaps tomorrow you will once again meet the same thoughtful and disgraced gaze as before, the same pale face, the same submissive and timid moments, and even repentance, even traces of some sort of deadening melancholy and annoyance at the short-lived exhilaration, and you regret that the momentary beauty faded so quickly, so irritably, that it flashed before you so deceptively and in vain. You regret this because there was not time for you even to fall in love with her. But nevertheless, my night was better than my day. Here's what happened. I arrived back in the city very late, and it had already struck 10 o'clock as I approached my apartment. My path ran along the embankment of the canal, where at that hour you will not find a living soul. True, I live in a very remote part of the city. I was walking and singing, and because when I'm happy, I'm sure to hum something to myself, like every other happy man who has neither friends nor good acquaintance, and who in joyful moment has nobody with whom he can share his joy. Suddenly the most unexpected adventure happened to me. Somewhat to the side, leaning against the railing of the canal, stood a woman with her elbows resting on the railing. She seemed to be looking very attentively at the canal's turbid water. She was wearing a very pretty yellow hat and bewitching black mantilla. She had she is a young girl. She was a young girl. She just has to be a brunette, I thought. It seems she had not heard my step. She didn't even stir when I walked past, with bait, bated breath and with my heart beating violently. Strange, I thought. She must be completely absorbed by something, and suddenly I stopped, rooted to the ground. I had heard of a muffled sob. Yes, I had not been deceived. The girl was crying, and a minute later there was another whimper, and then another. My God, my heart sank, and no matter how great my timidness with women, this was hardly the time. I turned around, took a step in her direction, and would certainly have uttered the word "Madam," but for the fact that I knew that this exclamation had already been uttered 1,000 times in all our Russian society novels. That was that was the only time that stopped me. But when I was searching for a word, the girl came to her senses, glanced back, recollected her where she was, cast her eyes down, and slipped past me along the embankment. I set off after her at once, but when she realized this, she quit the embankment, crossed the street, set out walking down the pavement. My heart was fluttering like a captured little bird. Suddenly, a certain incident came to my aid. On the sidewalk across the street, not far from my unknown girl, there suddenly appeared a gentleman in the evening dress, a man with a solid number of years behind him, with whose gait was anything but solid. He walked reeling and cheerfully leaning against the wall. The girl meanwhile walked as straight as an arrow, hurriedly and timidly, as the girls generally do when they don't want someone to offer to see them home at night. And of course, the teetering gentleman would never have caught up with her if my good fortune had not given him the idea of looking to unnatural methods. Suddenly, without saying a word to anyone, my gentleman darts off and flies as fast as his legs will carry him. Running, he catches up with my unknown girl. She was moving along like a wind, but the straggling gentleman was overtaking her. He had overtaken her. The girl cried out, and I thanked my good fortune for excellent naughty walking stick, which just happened to be in my right hand. On this occasion, in an instant, I found myself on the sidewalk across the street. In an instant, the uninvited gentleman understood was what, took into account my in incon, contro, incontrovertible reasoning, fell silent, dropped behind, and only when we were already quite far away did he approach me in rather energetic terms, but his words scarcely reached us. "Give me your hand," I said to unknown girl, "and he won't dare bother us anymore." In silence, she gave me her hand, which was still trembling from nervousness and fright. An unbidden gentleman. How graceful I was to you at that moment. I cast a cursory glance at her. She was very pretty and brunette. I had guessed right. On her back eyelashes still shone the tear of a recent fright or a former sorrow. I don't know which, but on her lips a smile already sparkled. She also cast a furtive glance at me, blushed, and looked down. "Now then, you see, why did you drive me away? If I had been there, nothing would have happened. But I didn't know you. I thought that you too. But do you really know me now?" "A little bit." "And now then, for example, why are you trembling?" "Oh, you guessed right from the very first," I answered, delighted that my girl was clever. That is never a bad thing where beauty is concerned. "Yes, you guessed from the very first glance the sort of the person you're dealing with." "Yes, it is true. It is true. I'm timid with women. I'm nervous. I won't deny it. No less than you were a moment ago. When the gentleman frightened you, I frightened now. It's like a dream, but even in my dream, I never guessed what I would ever talk with the women." "What, really?" "Yes, if my hand is trembling, then it is because such a pretty small hand like yours has never clasped it before. I've grown quite unused to women. That is, I never became used to them. You see, I'm alone and I don't even know how to talk to them. Even now, I don't know whether I have said something stupid to you. Tell me frankly. I should tell you that I don't take offense easily. Oh, nothing, nothing. On the contrary, and since you are already asking me to be candid, then I will tell you that the women like such timidity.